In 1943, American soldiers in the Pacific were facing a problem that seemed almost impossible for the mightiest industrial nation on Earth to solve. Bullets were running out. Marines wrote desperate letters home, begging for more ammunition. The war had stretched supply lines thin, and factories, despite working around the clock, couldn't keep pace with the demand. Every shell counted. Every round fired meant life or death. Yet day after day, soldiers found themselves rationing the very bullets that were supposed to be their lifeline. It's hard to imagine today, but even the United States, a nation that prided itself on industry, faced a shortage that threatened to stall its military campaigns. Factories were producing, but bottlenecks and inefficiencies slowed everything down. The issue wasn't manpower, there were plenty of workers, but the machinery, the workflow, and even small overlooked details were crippling production. Engineers had tried for decades to streamline ammunition plants, yet some problems persisted. Letters from the front began to arrive with a grim urgency. One Marine wrote that his unit had only half the bullets they needed, and they were forced to make every shot count. Soldiers improvised, scavenged, and rationed, but morale was dropping. Back home, the American public knew that victory depended not just on soldiers and strategy, but on the relentless hum of factories pumping out steel, brass, and gunpowder. Meanwhile, the factories were alive with activity. The air was thick with smoke and heat, the clang of metal on metal, and the steady rhythm of machines stamping and shaping cartridges. Women, many only teenagers or in their early 20s, worked tirelessly at assembly lines. They were the unsung force of the home front, stepping into roles that had once belonged almost entirely to men. Every shift was exhausting, every day another test of endurance, but still, the output didn't meet the staggering demand of the war. And then, in one corner of one factory, something extraordinary was about to happen. A young woman, barely 19 years old, noticed something that even experienced engineers had overlooked. Something so simple it could be sketched on a piece of packing paper, yet so powerful it would change the course of production forever. Her observation didn't just hint at a solution, it held the potential to double the output of an entire plant, and eventually every ammunition plant in America. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Soldiers were dying for lack of bullets. The nation's credibility, the war effort, even the future of entire campaigns depended on solving this crisis. And yet the solution came not from the top brass, not from a team of seasoned engineers, but from a factory floor where determination, curiosity, and sharp observation collided in a moment of inspiration. This was more than just a shortage of ammunition. It was a story of ingenuity, of ordinary people rising to meet extraordinary challenges, and of a nation forced to confront the limits of its own industrial power. The war would eventually be won on battlefields across the globe, but it was the quiet, unseen struggles of the home front that ensured the rifles stayed loaded, the artillery kept firing, and the soldiers had the bullets they desperately needed. Little did anyone know that a simple sketch on scrap paper would become one of the most significant breakthroughs in the history of wartime production, a breakthrough that would not only save lives, but also highlight the incredible, often overlooked contributions of the women who built the bullets that kept the war machine moving. As the war raged overseas, American women were stepping into roles that had once been unimaginable. Factories hummed with activity, and the clang of machinery became as familiar as church bells in small towns. Young women left classrooms, kitchens, and farms to join the workforce, filling the gaps left by men who had gone to fight. They were trained on the job, learning to operate massive stamping machines, drill presses, and assembly lines that produced the bullets and shells keeping soldiers alive. They were called Rosie the Riveters, a symbol of strength, resilience, and determination. But behind the iconic poster was a reality far grittier than the smiling image suggested. Long hours in deafening factories, exposure to toxic chemicals, and the constant risk of injury were daily challenges. Fingers were crushed, clothes caught in machines, and lungs filled with smoke.
Still, these women persisted, motivated not only by patriotism, but by the urgent knowledge that the men on the front lines depended on every ounce of their labor. At the Lake City Ordnance Plant in Missouri, one of the largest ammunition facilities in the country, the pressure was relentless. Cartridges had to be perfect, uniform, and reliable, or they could fail in combat. Engineers designed the machinery, but it was the women on the floor who operated it, adjusted it, and often discovered small flaws that could cause major delays. Each shift felt like a race against time. Every day without improvement meant fewer bullets reaching the battlefield, and for some soldiers, fewer chances to survive. The women who worked in these plants weren't just following instructions, they were inventing solutions on the fly. They learned to troubleshoot equipment, streamline processes, and anticipate problems before they became critical. They developed a knowledge of ammunition production that rivaled that of the engineers themselves. Every rivet hammered, every brass casing polished, every shell packaged was part of a larger life-saving effort that often went unnoticed in history books. And yet, despite their skill and determination, the plants still struggled to meet the ever-growing demands of the war. There were bottlenecks that no one had solved, inefficiencies that slowed production, and errors that caused delays. It was clear that even with the sheer force of labor, something more was needed, a spark of innovation that could change the course of the crisis. This is where ordinary people did something extraordinary. The very women who operated the machinery day after day began noticing patterns, inconsistencies, and opportunities for improvement. They saw things the engineers missed because they were living the process, feeling every hiccup and flaw in real time. Each observation, each suggestion became a building block toward a solution that would eventually double production. Their contributions were critical, not just as laborers, but as innovators. The home front had become a battlefield of its own, where ingenuity, courage, and skill determined how many bullets could reach a soldier in time. And while the world focused on generals and strategies, it was these women, so often overlooked, who quietly held the line. Among them, a young factory girl, barely 19, was about to make an observation that no one else had thought of. It wasn't a grand invention, nor a complex machine. It was a simple, clever adjustment that would prove that brilliance often comes from unexpected places. Her insight would soon ripple through the nation's ammunition plants, transforming the way America supplied its troops and forever changing the narrative of the home front. In the roar of presses and the rhythm of assembly lines, these women were not just building bullets, they were building victory. They were proving that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the most critical battles are fought not with rifles, but with determination, skill, and a relentless belief that their work mattered. Amid the roar of machines and the steady rhythm of stamping presses, a young factory girl noticed something that everyone else had overlooked. She was barely 19, new to the factory, yet she had a keen eye, the kind that sees not just what is, but what could be. Every day she watched the flow of cartridges through the assembly line, noticing small delays that engineers had long accepted as inevitable. To anyone else, it may have seemed like minor inefficiencies, nothing more than the noise and chaos of production, but to her, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. She remembered reading about a Civil War invention, a clever method for speeding up the loading of rifles. The idea sparked a thought. If a concept that worked decades ago could be adapted, perhaps it could solve the bottlenecks slowing the factories today. She grabbed a scrap piece of packing paper and began sketching. The lines were rough, the drawing simple, almost crude, yet the concept it represented was revolutionary. It suggested a minor adjustment to the assembly process that could eliminate wasted motion, prevent jams, and dramatically increase output. Her idea was bold, And in a culture dominated by engineers and supervisors, bold ideas were often met with skepticism. Some dismissed her sketch as naive, others simply ignored it, but she persisted, showing her drawing to colleagues, explaining her reasoning, and insisting that it could work. Her confidence was not arrogance, it was grounded in careful observation, repetition, and understanding of the production process that only someone on the floor could have. When her suggestion was finally tested, the results were astonishing. The simple adjustment she had proposed could double the daily output of the Lake City Ordnance Plant. Machines that had been underperforming now worked in harmony. Bottlenecks vanished and production surged. What had seemed impossible, a factory unable to keep up with the demand of a global war, was suddenly achievable. Her sketch had transformed a bottleneck into a streamlined, efficient process. Word of the innovation spread quickly. Other plants adopted the idea, and before long, every ammunition facility in the country had implemented her solution. The impact was enormous. Soldiers who had been rationing bullets now received the supply they desperately needed. Entire campaigns benefited, and the small insight of one young woman saved lives and strengthened America's war effort in a way few could have imagined. What makes this story remarkable is not just the ingenuity of a single individual, but how it highlights the power of observation and the contributions of those often overlooked. Engineers had studied these processes for decades, yet it took fresh eyes, persistence, and curiosity to see what everyone else missed. The Factory Girl's discovery reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected places, from people willing to question, to notice, and to act. She didn't hold a title or a degree. She didn't command armies or draft strategies. She simply worked on the floor, noticed a problem, and imagined a solution. And in doing so, she became part of an invisible army that fought the war not with rifles or tanks, but with intellect, determination, and a belief that every bullet counted. The story of her sketch is more than just a technical breakthrough. It is a testament to the women who labored tirelessly on the home front, who applied skill, insight, and courage to tasks that were often taken for granted. It is a reminder that victories are not always won in battlefields, but sometimes on factory floors, through quiet acts of brilliance that ripple across an entire nation.
The factory floor had already been a whirlwind of noise and motion, but when the young girl's idea was finally implemented, the rhythm changed. Machines that once paused or jammed now moved smoothly. Brass casings and shells flowing down the lines with a new efficiency. Workers who had spent hours wrestling with stubborn presses found the process almost effortless. It was as if someone had lifted an invisible weight that had been slowing the entire operation for decades. The impact was immediate. Lake City Ordnance Plant doubled its daily output almost overnight. Cartridges that had taken hours to produce now rolled off the line in half the time. Everyone uniform, reliable, and ready for shipment. Supervisors and engineers, initially skeptical, could not ignore the results. Reports went straight to higher command, and soon the solution was being replicated in other ordnance plants across the country. News of the breakthrough traveled quickly, though not in headlines or newspapers. It traveled along the networks of factory supervisors, engineers, and the women themselves. Each new plant that adopted the method added thousands of bullets to the front lines every day. The ripple effect was enormous. Soldiers who had been rationing ammunition now received sufficient supply, and units in the Pacific and Europe could fight without the constant fear of running dry. The impact also revealed the remarkable skill and adaptability of the women who made it happen. They didn't just follow orders, they understood the machinery, anticipated problems, and helped refine the new process. Some even suggested further improvements, small adjustments that continued to increase output and reduce waste. It was a collaboration between sharp minds on the floor and the innovative insight of one observant young worker. For the soldiers overseas, the effect was tangible.
Battles could be fought with greater confidence, operations could be planned without the constant concern of ammunition shortages, and lives were saved because bullets arrived when they were most needed. Yet at home, these achievements often went unrecognized. The women who made this possible, who toiled with blistered hands and aching muscles, rarely appeared in photographs or news stories. Their contribution was essential, yet largely invisible to the world outside the factories. Within the walls of the factories, however, pride and determination were palpable. Women shared stories of how their efforts mattered, of how their small actions could ripple across continents and oceans. They had become inventors, troubleshooters, and innovators, all while fulfilling a vital role in the nation's war effort. Every cartridge stamped and every shell packaged was a silent testament to their ingenuity and resilience. The breakthrough also changed the culture of the plants. Supervisors began encouraging workers to speak up when they noticed inefficiencies, to suggest improvements, and to take ownership of the production process. What had started as a single observation became a movement of shared problem-solving and continuous innovation. Workers felt their contributions had meaning beyond the lines and presses. They were directly influencing the war effort. The breakthrough at Lake City was more than just a production improvement. It was a turning point. It demonstrated the power of observation, creativity, and collaboration. It showed that solutions often come from those closest to the problem, from those willing to question, notice, and act. And in the case of Lake City, that courage and insight saved countless lives, strengthened the front lines, and forever changed the story of the women of the home front.
By the time the war was turning in favor of the Allies, the contributions of the women on the home front had become undeniable. They were not the ones landing on beaches, marching through jungles, or facing machine gun fire, yet their labor had been just as critical to victory. Every bullet, every shell, every cartridge that reached the front lines was a product of their hands, their minds, and their determination. Without them, soldiers could have faced shortages that might have changed the course of battles, campaigns, even entire theaters of war. The young factory girl whose insight had doubled production remained largely unknown outside the walls of the plant. She returned to her work quietly, blending into the thousands of other women who operated presses, inspected brass, and packaged ammunition day after day. Her contribution, while extraordinary, was part of a larger story, an army of mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends who took up the mantle of wartime industry when their nation needed them most. Historians now call these women the backbone of America's war effort. Yet for decades, their names were absent from the textbooks, overshadowed by generals, soldiers, and political leaders. Posters of Rosie the Riveter captured their image, but rarely their individual stories. They were engineers, problem solvers, and innovators, yet their genius was measured not in medals or accolades, but in bullets produced, in factories running smoothly, and in lives saved far away from the front lines. The ingenuity displayed on the factory floors offers a remarkable lesson. Innovation often comes from unexpected places. Those closest to the problem, working hands, keen eyes, and observant minds, can see solutions that others overlook. The simple sketch on packing paper, the small adjustment to a press, the careful observation of workflow, these were the tools that changed production and ultimately changed the war. As production surged, so did morale among the women. They began to take pride not only in meeting quotas, but in solving problems that had stumped engineers for decades. The factories became classrooms of practical invention, where mistakes were lessons and creativity was rewarded in efficiency and output. Every improvement meant more bullets on the battlefield, more support for soldiers, and a step closer to victory. When the war finally ended, the nation celebrated its soldiers, its generals, and its military victories, but the factories fell silent and the women returned to civilian life. Many carried stories of exhaustion, injury, and sacrifice, but also stories of triumph and ingenuity. They had proven that courage is not confined to the battlefield, and that heroism can take many forms, from the courage to fight to the courage to innovate. Today, the legacy of these women lives on. Museums, documentaries, and historians now honor their contributions, finally recognizing that the war was won not only by rifles and tanks, but by brass, steel, and bleeding hands. They remind us that victory often depends on unseen forces, on dedication and creativity in places far from the headlines. The story of a 19-year-old girl, a simple sketch, and thousands of determined women is more than a tale of production and innovation. It is a story of resilience, ingenuity, and the power of ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges. It is a testament to the forgotten heroes, the women who built the bullets, and the nation they helped to save. Without them, the rifles would have been silent, and the history of World War II would be incomplete. Their legacy endures as a reminder that every hand, every mind, and every small act of courage matters. Victory is never just the work of those on the battlefield, it is also the labor of those who supply, invent, and sustain. The women of the home front deserve their place alongside the soldiers they served, remembered not for the posters that depicted them, but for the lives they touched and the war they helped to win.